Congratulations on this incredible series.
Thank you so much.
First of all, I just wondered, what sort of window did you feel that the diaries offered you into Warhol's life and work, and what did you particularly want to draw out from them?
Well, I started this process of making the diaries as a series in 2011 when I reread the diaries on tour with the film Page One that I had directed then. And Andy's voice came through to me in such an intimate way, especially when he talked about his love life, when he talked about his pursuit of John Gould, his feelings about Jed Johnson. And so I immediately knew that I wanted to adapt it as a love story, and that the celebrity parties, the events, were not to me as interesting as the romantic side of Andy. So that was always my focus.
And it's interesting the way you talk about it is because it almost sounds like you can hear his voice. So tell me, the using the AI technology is a very bold move. And when I first read that, I kind of thought, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. Why, how did you come up with that idea? And when did you know, oh, actually, this is something that's, is going to work?
100%. Well, I think, in that moment when I was reading the diaries alone on tour, I would go back to my hotel room or I would go to a coffee shop, and I just felt that Andy was in my ear, in my head, and in my heart. And that's the first moment that I thought, there have been so many portrayals of Andy, whether it's David Bowie or Jared Harris or others, in which the actor kind of steals the show, usually in a good way. But to the extent that my focus was so much on humanizing Andy and understanding this new side of him that had not been revealed before, I didn't want an actor to come in the middle. And I wanted it to be coming from Andy directly. So this was also in 2011, a moment when voice cloning was first starting to emerge as a valid tech. And so it wasn't until, though, 2020 when I hired the company Resemble AI to take a data set and create an algorithm that I could start inserting the text of the diaries and the text of the script that I had written to adapt it, and start to see, does this feel right? And sort of tune the balance of how mechanical he was with how human he could be.
Well, yeah, I think it works beautifully.
Thank you.
And
so happy to hear that.
Yeah, and I think it does recreate the experience that you were describing of hearing him in your own mind as he takes us through it, and you kind of forget that it's not really his voice a lot of the time. I certainly did anyway. And can you give me a bit of an insight into exploring Andy's queerness through what we see what we read in the diaries, and also what we don't, because you bring in poetry and letters and personal photography and video.
Queer longing is really, for me, the key to Andy's worldview as it comes through in the diaries. It is a sense that he wants to fill a void in his life that perhaps is a response to having no role models in his immediate world for long-term domestic partnerships in the 1970s and in the 1980s. It's something that Alan Wanzenberg says, that it did exist, but it was bizarre for two men to be together. And so he's looking at a heteronormative media with Hollywood films like Rebel Without a Cause or Mommy Dearest or The Outsiders, and trying to see himself in those often female protagonists and storylines. And so I immediately found his descriptions of those movies to be an incredible window into his aesthetic sensibility, and also his feeling of queerness butting up against a hetero mainstream world. The poetry that John Gould wrote was another revelation for me, because it is also coming from John, who's in the closet, who lives a double life and is trying to create a language in connecting with Andy, who's this older man that he has love for, but has to hide. And so there, the poetry and the ways of sort of abstracting their love and talking around it becomes another like code system to then understand the artwork. And to see how symbols are contained in something like the Last Supper series and the Big C painting, and how there's so much meaning in things that operate in one way on the surface, but then when you come to know them better, contain this love. So the archive, understanding the depth of Andy's relationship to John, and then sort of triangulating that with the paintings, that was all part of the scripts that I wrote in order to make sense of this and bring it to life.
And it feels like an unapologetically queer series too, from just the work of Andy's that you've chosen to include. Because I can imagine watching a 6-part series on Andy that maybe didn't show the Polaroids of hustlers and porn stars and the more explicitly queer work. So what were your sort of guiding principles there for including that?
To begin with, I wanted to focus on Andy's late career artwork, which is often ignored. It comes about in a moment when he's viewed as not in his prime anymore. And so people have not given it the same art historical analysis. But also it is at a moment when, as Benjamin Liu, his assistant, says, he's coming to peace with his homosexuality. So there's incredible meaning and vulnerability in the Shadow series, in the Last Supper, in the Rorschach paintings that I wanted to have as a fulcrum in every episode, to make sure that the vividness of Andy's queer point of view on the artwork would come through at least 1 to 2 major times each episode.
I think Warhol is someone that pretty much everyone has some kind of opinion on. So what were your kind of guiding principles for who you wanted to speak to, and what kind of insights were you looking for? I like that you got a lot of your contributors to read from the diaries themselves, and we get to see some of that.
I was really looking to have a balance between people who knew Andy at the time and knew John Gould and Jed Johnson, the main characters, as well as some art historians who could speak incisively on the later work and on Andy's queer dimensions as an artist. So that became the guiding principle for me. It wasn't about the celebrities or the parties. It was about Andy's love life and who could speak authentically on what these people mean to him.
Yeah. And I was particularly surprised to see Andy smile so much. And I think that's something that comes through probably more in the private footage that we see. And I just wondered what surprised you the most as you were, assembling the film and doing your research.
Absolutely. You were saying seeing him smile so much?
Mm-hmm.
So the archival footage that I was able to get of Andy in Cape Cod, this Super 8 film, an excursion that he took with John Gould and Vincent Fremont and Christopher Makos and Peter Wise, you see Andy at the dinner table, shaking party favors, laughing and being so joyous with John. And it was, to me, a revelation to see Andy in that sort of joyful, unguarded manifestation. Also, the photographs that he took, the snapshots, there are, I believe, almost 20,000 snapshots in the collection. The most photographed person is John Gould. That is the person that Andy took the most photos of. And it just speaks to his connection to John and his love for him, And that also, I think, is a very important revelation, because a lot of people perhaps don't view John as having had an authentic relationship with Andy, or remove him from the record. But I tried to unerase John. I wanted to bring him back.
Well, Andrew Rossi, thanks very much, and congratulations again on the series.
Thank you so much, James. It's really nice to talk to you, and I love the Queer Review. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, we love Andy.